Danny Kaya's here. Oh man, she looks like
Okay, wait, just hang on a second here. All right. I'm gonna ask everybody to make sure that you are muted. Okay, thank you. All right. All right, so let's begin. Uh, my name is Karen Petrone, and I am the director of the Cooperative for the Humanities and Social Sciences, which was created in 2000 by the 2020, by the College of Arts and Sciences to facilitate interdisciplinary connections and to also promote faculty and graduate student engagement with communities outside of UK. The cooperative demonstrates the value and the contributions of the humanities and the social sciences in sustaining our communities and solving critical social problems. Tonight, our panel is on vaccine hesitancy and political polarization. It is in conjunction with National Minority Health Month, and we are very honored to have the co-sponsorship of the Center for Health Equity Transformation and the College of Medicine Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I'm very grateful to our co-sponsors for their support, both in terms of promotion of the event and also financial support. So thank you very much for that. We will launch into our meeting. Please, everyone, if you don't mind, be sure to mute yourselves so that we don't have any distractions. What I'd like to do is everybody will begin in alphabetical order. And so we will start with Casey Allen Bryant, who is Lexington Fayette County's Commissioner of Social Services. She holds master's degrees in nursing and in public health from the University of Kentucky. She has served as the chair of Lexington's Board of Health and also as a lecturer at UK's School of Nursing. So thank you, Casey Allen Bryant, for joining us tonight. And I'm going to spotlight you now. If I can figure out how to do that. Let's see, spotlight for everyone. There you go.
Thank you so much. I want to share my screen. All right, thank you. And I'm not going to belabor this too long because I know we're going to get into more discussion, but if I don't have this in front of me, then I'll bound to get off task. So just what I'm really focusing on kind of tonight, and which I focused on and still am with the Lexington Fayette County Board of Health, is vaccine hesitancy among African Americans. And just to kind of give you a few little statistics in terms of burden of disease in African American community, what we do know is that in terms of the mortality rate, so how many African Americans have died, we are more likely to die than the majority population, which in this case we're talking about our Caucasian Americans, actually at 1.4 times the rate. And we account for about 15% of COVID-19 deaths, even though African Americans only make up about 12% of the population. So the burden of disease is there. But when you look at the vaccine rates, and I always like to put a comparison because people will say, well, what are the numbers, and looking at our vaccine rates. So considering one dose, so whether that is one dose of Moderna, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, but even though Black non-Hispanics make up about 12% of the US population, as I said previously, only about 10% of those who received the first dose are Black non-Hispanic. So the numbers aren't matching up, which is in comparison though, and I'm sure some of my colleagues on here will discuss this as well. It's still disproportionate in our white non-Hispanic population as well. And like I said, I like to put comparison data on there where we have population that makes up 59.4% of the US population and then about 55% of people with at least one dose. Regarding boosters, there are some disparities in terms of African Americans who have received the booster dose, or those who are eligible. Of those who are eligible, only about 43.6%, almost 44% have received that booster dose. So there is some lagging. There is African Americans have have participated initially in the vaccine program. It's still lagging, but definitely when it comes to the booster dose. And as we know, as science has told us, is that we really need those booster doses for those who are eligible. We still are seeing a disproportion of that. And we see it amongst other races as well. But I'm mostly focusing at this point on our African-American population. This is a study that was done. It's when you're looking at, I like to put pie graphs and charts and whatnot in there just to kind of throw it up a little bit. But when you're looking at, in terms of all persons in the different races, of why they're not going to get vaccines, this is about 1.5 years or so old, but I would imagine that the numbers haven't changed greatly. And so what this study did was looking to see, in terms of upcoming release of COVID vaccine, who will get the vaccine? I'll wait, not sure, I will never get the vaccine. As you can see, with our Black or African American population, in the orange there, which is down here, is, I'm not sure, but about 23% said they'll never get the vaccine. And so, and we're kind of seeing that in terms of numbers. If you look at the booster rates, as I showed on the previous slide, these numbers about match up even now. And that previous slide that I showed you with the booster rates, and that was data from today, as of today. And compared to the majority population, these numbers are very disproportionate. I mean, you can see in the white population, almost 31% said they would get the vaccine as soon as they can, where it was only about 16% in Black or African American. And so we've been looking at these numbers for a long time as public health practitioners, as the health department. And one of the things we immediately said is, what can we do to try to increase the vaccine hesitancy? Because even looking at national data, like I previously showed, or just listening to anecdotal stories and what we hear from our community members, like we know that this is going to be a hard population to vaccinate. And the first thing that we try to do is try to understand. As someone who is a member of this race, it was a little easier for me, right, to get in and to try to figure out, what's going on, why. Some of these reasons I can hear my own family members saying, and I'm just going to go over these briefly. There's some history of racism and just mistrust of the medical profession. And we have experiments that were done on the African American population. The most popular one that people will cite time and time again is the Tuskegee Experiment, and where African American men, treatment for syphilis was purposefully withheld from them for the purposes of seeing how the disease would progress in that population. And this is cited multiple times and passed down amongst generations, because, like, hey, we have this new vaccine, it's just a time for them to test on us. It's just, remember the Tuskegee Experiment. And so there's other points in history, especially medical research, like the Henrietta Lacks story, where this woman's cells, unbeknownst to her and her family, was used for thousands and thousands of research studies without permission from her or her family. And people in our community know about these things. And so they have this mistrust. And then just the mistrust of some of their experiences that they've had in medical communities. So when they look at this vaccine, they're like, well, this is just another government experiment. It came about too fast. That goes along with the myths and false information, because I've heard this time and time again. It came about too fast. How can I know it's safe? They didn't test it on us. Well, that's not true. If you look at the data from the Moderna and Pfizer studies, many African Americans were included in these studies. And so it has been proven to be safe for our community. And just the propagation of false information about the vaccines, period, about COVID, period, are some of the reasons why African Americans are hesitant about getting the vaccine. And then just fear. And I don't know if this is African American specific, but it is one of the reasons cited in the literature, is just fear of the unknown. What's going to happen to me if I get this vaccine? Am I going to develop some kind of unknown disorder? So these are just some of the kind of briefly, and I'm sure we'll get into more discussion later about why some of the hesitancy we see amongst this community.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, that was the end. I should have clicked to the next slide so that you know I was done.
Oh, okay. Oh, no worries. It's fine. We're good. All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And next, we are going to hear from Mark Peffley. Mark Peffley is university research professor. I am unmuted, right? There you go. You can hear me, yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me here. Give me a second here. There we go. Uh, Mark Peffley is a university research professor in the Department of Political Science who studies political and racial tolerance in the US and other countries. He's the inaugural director of QIPSR, the Quantitative Initiative for Policy and Social Research. Established in 2010, its mission is to organize events to enhance policy relevant research at the university. So, Mark, I'm really glad that you're with us tonight to discuss the issue of political polarization and vaccine hesitancy. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, I study public opinion and mostly in the US, and like most political scientists these days, I'm pretty worried about all the metrics showing that there's a huge increase in political polarization. And it kind of began in the 1980s and accelerated in the 21st century. Now we know that Congress is so polarized between the parties, and this polarization is higher than it's been since the Civil War. But the kind of polarization that I'm really interested in and like to stay up at night and worry about is not so much issue polarization, where the parties are at different opposite ends of an issue continuum like abortion or healthcare. Although there is a fair amount of that. What I and other political scientists are worried about is something called affective or identity polarization. And the easiest way to kind of identify it is that it means that strong partisans, strong Republicans and strong Democrats hate each other. And we've seen this level of disdain and political prejudice increase among strong partisans for the opposition party. And, here I've got a graph just showing how much strong partisans discriminate socially in choosing marriage partners, work partners, or friendships. And and most recent studies have kind of focused on, it's a small percentage of strong partisans, but some of whom are willing to express, an intent to do harm or injure the opposition party. So that's kind of where we are these days. And because things are so polarized, it gives more influence to, party leaders on the national stage. And to contradict the medical community when it comes to getting vaccinated. But
Mark, can I interrupt
yeah.
you a minute? Could you go to slideshow so that they can show so you can show the
slideshow, yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
I'm trying to.
Thank you. So, this is just an example of a recent publication that everyone, about 15 co-authors in my area signed on to. And it's not really an exaggeration that polarization these days is a poisonous cocktail of othering, aversion, and moralization. And even the title is scary. So but it's typical of the kind of research that's done in this area. Now, these are slides that you've probably seen in the New York Times or the Kaiser Family Foundation. And you can see in red and blue states, we get a huge clustering of vaccination rates. You know, they're much more likely to be vaccinated in blue states than red states, and consequently, COVID deaths are much higher in red states as well. This is kind of an interesting graph too, and you can see, you know, the COVID cases. The red is obviously Republican, blue is Democratic. But early on in the pandemic, of course, it was urban areas like in Seattle and New York City, uh, in blue states that were most affected. But that soon changed and kind of reversed, so that whenever there's a spike in a new variant, you see many more Republicans dying than Democrats. And the reason is simple, that they're not vaccinated. And so you see this in Biden versus Trump counties. And the degree of polarization increased, didn't decrease in 2021. So those Democrats not vaccinated were kind of a small portion, but a pretty large portion of Republicans were not vaccinated. Okay. Now, obviously, these party differences could be due to other factors. I mean, red states and Trump supporters tend to be more rural. They tend to be non-college educated, blue collar workers, and also living in the South. And all those categories of people are associated with having less trust in government and less trust in government programs administering vaccines. But, and this is the real, there are factors, even after you control for all the other factors, partisanship is the dominant division in remaining in figuring out who is likely to and who has not been vaccinated. And early on in the pandemic, even though Donald Trump and his administration invested a lot in, you know, vaccines that proved successful, he was pretty instrumental in solidifying opposition to all kinds of mitigation factors. And instead of promoting vaccines, he promoted, you know, a lot of pretty strange ideas, I guess we could say, hydroxychloroquine and other things. So there's that Trump effect. The other reason, if you scratch the surface and dig down a little bit in terms of why do we still have this huge partisan divide and vaccine hesitancy, is that beginning in the 1990s, Republicans began to express much less trust in science and also in experts. And that's been declining for several decades. And one reason is obviously because Republican politicians were instrumental in debunking scientific consensus in the 1990s on climate change and a number of other issues. And this has had some pretty serious negative effects in terms of, you know, vaccine hesitancy for the Republican Party. So this is just a graph showing how Republicans became much less trustful of science beginning in the 1990s, and it continues today, of course. The other reason is that, you know, the two parties are divided in terms of the kind of media that they watch, where they get their news. And one thing that we know from a number of content analysis studies is that, partisan news on the conservative side, Fox, Newsmax, Breitbart, One American News Network, they traffic in a lot more misinformation and conspiracy theories about the risk of COVID vaccines. I don't know, if you watch Fox News or Newsmax, it's pretty clear that it's not just face coverings, but also COVID vaccines. Here's the poster boy, Ron Johnson, senator from Wisconsin. Whenever he's concerned about getting reelected, he drops another crackpot piece of misinformation. So you have a lot of people, a lot of Republicans being exposed to misinformation and conspiracy theories. So one of the things that we know about Republicans is that they do tend to place a lot of faith and consume most of their political information from Fox News and partisan media. And you can see it's pretty clear that Republicans are more likely to watch Fox News, and Democrats rely on a pretty diverse menu of mainstream news plus MSNBC. And the other thing we know is from studies done, this doesn't show cause and effect, but there's a big covariation between the kinds of news programming that you watch or news networks that you watch and the number of false statements about COVID that you believe. And I don't have really much in the way of a slide here, but the other thing that a lot of political science research has shown for several years is that once anti-vax beliefs get rooted, they're extremely difficult to change. And I could talk about that later if you'd like. But if there is a silver lining, some economists and a political scientist, Mark Hetherington at UNC, did a study showing that one thing that Donald Trump has is a little bit of credibility in red counties, that voted for him. And even though Trump hid it for most of his presidency, he did get vaccinated and boosted. And at least one time at a rally, he promoted the idea of getting vaccinated before being booed by his fans. And so these political scientists and economists constructed an ad, and some donor contributed $100,000 to run the ad on YouTube in low vaccination rate counties that supported Trump. And what do you know? The average cost, it was not wildly successful, but by tracking CDC vaccination data in those counties, they figured out that after a short campaign of about a month of ads, they probably got, maybe 100 to 200 additional vaccinations in the targeted counties. This was a field experiment, so it's did I go too long?
I know I just sent you
Okay.
the 10-minute
Okay.
mark. You have about a
Good.
minute more if you want to wrap up.
Well, no, that's okay. So it is a life and death consequence, political polarization. We know that polarization has a lot of terrible consequences, democratic backsliding around the world. But in the United States, it's had some life and death consequences, mainly for Republicans who were subjected to a lot of misinformation about COVID and the effectiveness of vaccines. That's it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that perspective and all the beautiful graphs. All right.
Stop sharing.
There you go. Thank you. So next we have Tiffany Scott, who I'm going to look for her. There she is. I'm going to spotlight her. Hold on. Can I do that? Whoa, there we go. Here we go. Here I can replace the spotlight. There you go. There we go. Tiffany Scott has an MA in communications, and she is the former project manager of Faith Moves Mountains, which under the direction of our own Nancy Schoenberg from UK, has led under the direction of Nancy, Tiffany has led the Appalachians in Control Diabetic Research Study. She is also an entrepreneur, and owner of the General Store in Pine Mountain Crossing, which has many Kentucky Proud items in the region and prides itself on working with local farmers, authors, crafters, and artisans to showcase the talent in the mountains. So thank you, Tiffany.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. So I'm not here today with a bunch of graphs. I'm not that person who's got all this hardcore data related to vaccination hesitation in my area. But I want to start off my time with a little story. So there was a ferocious storm that swept through a town, and in the aftermath, a man holds on to his roof to escape the floodwaters. As he sits there, someone in a canoe comes by and offers to help carry him to safety. But he says, "No, thanks. God is going to save me." The man paddles off and the waters continue to rise. Shortly afterward, someone on a boat comes by and offers to help. "No, thank you," the man said. "God is going to deliver me." The waters rise higher and higher, and finally a Coast Guard helicopter appears. Someone with a megaphone offers to drop a ladder. "No, thank you. I have prayed for God to save me." The helicopter flies off, the waters engulf the roof, and eventually the man drowns. And when the man arrives in heaven, he asks in confusion, "What happened, God? Why didn't you not rescue me?" And God replies, "I sent you a canoe, I sent you a boat, and I sent you a helicopter. What more did you want?" So that's how I wanted to start my presentation, because as Karen pointed out, I worked under the direction of Nancy Schoenberg for a community-based research project where we worked with faith-based communities. And so I was asked to address you guys today, talking a little bit about what I saw in rural Appalachia. I'm located down in Letcher County, Kentucky. And so I worked closely with religious leaders and churches for the duration of our project until I recently stepped down from that position to continue on with my general store that has just kind of took over things. So that story right there, that's a parable story I'm sure most of you have heard in one form or another. But, when you think about COVID, I mean, what better description of COVID is this flood that has just flooded our lives for the last couple of years. And, in our instance, to me, our three lifesavers have been Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson. And so when you think about that and you think about the people that we have saw be so hesitant to accept these life rafts, these lifeboats, if you will, we all have different reasons for those. We all have we're seeing different things in our communities. We're seeing different things in our work. I think that's why this panel is so important, to talk about the different communities and what they're seeing. So today, what I would like to do is just share a little bit of what I'm seeing here in Eastern Kentucky as far as those hesitancies go. in looking basically from three perspectives, one being the project manager for Dr. Schoenberg's project here, the Faith Moves Mountains Initiative, where I formerly led a diabetic research study. Second, as a small business owner, trying to navigate the waters during COVID. And third is just a general community person here in the mountains of what I have seen and heard. You know, my opinions and my observations are solely on just my experiences that I've seen and dealt with. You know, one thing I want to be clear on, you know, there's been so much, we know, you know, as the two previous folks spoke, you know, we know the rumors and we know the rumor mills and we know all the false information we've all been given and everybody has heard. You know, we talk about Fox News, we talk about, you know, those things, but just our own family, our own friends, and those sometimes are often more predominantly influential than Fox News. It may not be you watch Fox News, but you may have a brother, a sister, a family friend that does, and you trust and value their opinions. And so you're believing them because you have that faith in them and what they believe. So we see a lot of that. We saw a lot of that here in Eastern Kentucky. But one thing I know that there had been some talk about is the lack of vaccination clinics here. That's not the case. Everybody here has had ample opportunity to be vaccinated. We even held a vaccination clinic here at our general store. There has been every turn, every corner, every clinic, every hospital, every organization, every community outreach program has had vaccination clinic after vaccination clinic after clinic here in Eastern Kentucky. So there has been generally no shortage of availability of those vaccines. You know, we began our work during the pandemic to, you know, as we were trying to work with Nancy and the folks there at UK to say, hey, what are we going to do with our study here? You know, we had to make those decisions on how we were going to try to work with diabetic patients in the middle of this pandemic. You know, that was one of the target folks, a high-risk group was diabetics. And so we essentially halted our research at that time. And we really was not able to move forward face-to-face interaction with those folks. But, you know, we dealt, the way we worked, the way we operated is we worked with the local churches, the faith-based community. We would go out to those churches and have large-scale health screening events, and we would go have diabetic education classes at those churches. So that for us kind of had to come to a screeching halt, if you will, and we had to go back and revisit and be creative in the ways that we brought those delivery methods for that information out there. But, you know, as we watched what happened in the faith-based community because of COVID, you know, there was orders that came down, you know, churches were closed, businesses were closed. And, you know, here in Eastern Kentucky, you know, when I'd always talked about our project, you know, when you look at the state of Kentucky, you know, we always seem to be the red zone down here in the South, whether you're looking at heart disease, you're looking at diabetes, you're looking at cancer rates. We're the red of the red, but we are also the heart of the Bible Belt. So there is churches upon churches up every hill and holler in our area. And so it was very interesting for me to see in my research work of how these different churches responded to COVID and how they moved forward. And I believe that was one key area where you could watch folks in the community of whether they would decide to get that vaccine or not get that vaccine. And, you know, as we looked and we talked about, you know, continuing our work in different churches and you know, as we move forward and time progressed with COVID, you know, we had to look at who was staff that was vaccinated and not wanting to be vaccinated and all these different things. But the churches in general, it was very interesting to see who was able to successfully continue having services, whether it be online or not be online. In our area there, we still do have areas where internet is not, and Wi-Fi and cell phone service isn't the best. So even though many areas could jump right into online worship services and online, you know, live streaming of their services, that wasn't the case for everyone here. So a lot of those churches simply did close their doors. And that was met with a lot of hesitancy in itself. There were some churches that never did close their doors. And so I think we saw a lot of the vaccination hesitancy here in our area regarding faith-based communities based on what those leaders said. And until the point of those leaders saying, yes, you should do this, or no, you shouldn't, a lot of people took that to the bank. And the same thing with the political world as well. You know, you're speaking about President Trump and his statements that he made. That was a big thing with the faith-based world as well. Another key thing with us as a small business owner was trying to navigate how we would work with their employees. We have 24 employees here at my store, and we have a cross-generational team of folks, and those range from, you know, underage minors who still have to go by their parents' rules, and then we have all the way up to 78-year-old retired individuals that work for us. And so our number one thing was to keep those folks safe, but to also keep ourselves safe and our families. And so that was, you know, we have heard so many stories and so many different things. People have taken stances based on religious beliefs. I have heard everything from the vaccine is the mark of the beast. If you take the vaccine, you know, you're getting an implant. You are, today I met with my UK team today. We had a lunch meeting, and they were sharing some additional stories with me. One lady told me today she was told that the vaccination completely alters your DNA, and you're going to be a totally different person if you take the vaccine. So, you know, we're, like I said, a strong faith-based community in these mountains, and, you know, just the fear of the possibility of doing something that could be far worse than dying of COVID, you know, from some of these stories that we have heard. I've got staff that have had both parents pass away of COVID, but yet the person refuses still to this day to have their vaccination. You know, we have had individuals who have a neighbor who has had open heart surgery, and their specialist provider advised them to not get their vaccine, which was very shocking to me. So in turn, that person tells their family, their friends, hey, my heart doctor said do not get the vaccine. Well, then, if his heart doctor said don't get the vaccine, I surely don't need to get the vaccine. And it you know, stair steps on down. But I think, you know, as many things go with the news media and social media, you know, social media is a great, wonderful, beautiful thing. And when it's used correctly, but during COVID, it has been, you talk about false information, but it all boils down here. And I just truly believe that a lot of the hesitancy in our area is who folks feel like they can trust. You know, whether it be their pastor, whether it be their sister, their family, their friend. A lot of folks have really just took others' advice, and they've never really done the research themselves or asked the questions themselves. And I think that's been a big thing for us here. I'm just trying to look at some notes I had. But those were a couple of the big things that that just stuck out to me, was just the faith-based community, just the uncertainty. And, you know, there's always that issue when you're dealing with faith-based communities. They don't ever want to feel like that they're being told what to do from the state. You know, we got to keep that separation of church and state. And people felt lines were crossed and lines were blurred. And that in itself made people back away from the vaccine, I feel like, because you know, the government was trying to tell us what to do. So that was another key thing that we saw here. But still, you know, now I had a physician friend of mine, his son works at a hospital, and he said, you know, when he was working in the thick of the pandemic, he said, you know, when I'm working on the floor, I'm treating patients who have had the vaccine. But when I'm working in the unit, the ICU unit, I'm treating patients who didn't get the vaccine. And, you know, we've tried to tell that story, and we've tried to make that part of our platform is this vaccination isn't the end all be all. You know, I had the vaccine, I had the booster myself, and I still wound up with COVID. But I didn't die. You know, I felt like it was definitely a life raft that was thrown to us. So that's just a little bit of what I've saw here in Eastern Kentucky.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your joining the panel and your perspective. Thank you so much. All right, our final panelist, Isabel Herrera Taylor, and I'm going to spotlight you. Hang on here a second. Let me find you and spotlight you. There you are. Okay, I'm going to replace spotlight. There we go. Excellent. Isabel Herrera Taylor has law degrees from the University of Texas at Austin and master's degrees from Vrije Universiteit in the Netherlands and the London School of Economics, Queen Mary College, and International Business Law. Isabel retired from the law and has since worked for LFUCG, handling multicultural affairs, and she also heads the Lexington Global Engagement Center, Global Lex, under the mayor's office. She is the Lexington Fayette government's international community liaison. And so we welcome you and thank you for your expertise.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to try to give you a brief but broader picture of our international population. Not all are immigrants or refugees or international students or business people. It's a very complex mix. I normally try not to throw all of them together, Hispanics, Latin Americans, Africans, Asians, into single groups. But I do see, anecdotally, I do see that levels of education and rural versus urban backgrounds do make a difference in working through the whole social media misinformation and working through any new vaccine fears. Language is also an issue, a very strong barrier to getting accurate information. So we have some 207 languages that we're tracking here in Lexington. I don't know how many of those are live. We've been tracking this for maybe 12 years. But I can say that at this moment in the public schools, we have 96 different languages. And it's growing. We have about 7,900 children learning English, and that just from last year, it grew 9%. So it's a fast growing population. It's hard to keep up with and understanding it. The complexity just grows. So we may have some 80,000 people by my estimates from around the world in Lexington. And each is an individual and it comes from a complex mix of socioeconomic backgrounds, all educational levels, many different cultures, different languages, even within the same countries that they come from. So now looking at vaccine hesitancy, beginning with Hispanics, as a group, we're currently doing quite well. It reversed itself because it was originally it was very low vaccination rate and very hard hit. And that's reversed itself quite well very recently. They are now nationally currently about 65% vaccination rate. Though they started very low, they've come around. Asians nationally are around 85% vaccination rate. I don't have data, I can't find data. I don't think they collected on our African communities as opposed to African Americans. From the Middle East, we have a very high also vaccination rate, very highly educated, very a lot of medical people here in our community that are very proactive with education and with ensuring that everyone gets tested, gets vaccinated. From India, we have a very broad range of educational and linguistic differences. But majority do speak English and have access to information. They have a great number of higher degrees, as do our Chinese and Japanese communities. From Africa, we've dealt with some of the things that our African community members have said to me has been things like, well, we've dealt with much worse things back home than the flu. We're okay with managing it with tea, with garlic, with lemon, turmeric, and other concoctions. There are two underlying factors. One is a mistrust of government and strangers that are not African community members. They're very clannish. They rely. They're very social among their community. They're very close knit, and they revere their elders. So if an elder recommends this is not a good thing, we'll do our traditional medications, that's what they will do for the most part. Having said that, within the African communities, there's a very high level of education and people that are researchers and doctoral level educators. And they will be having a very high vaccination rate. From Latin America, it's a very complex area. We've got 20 or more countries represented here. And when Mark was going through his political discussions, I was thinking to myself that the Cubans totally identify with the Republican parties, and the say the Puerto Ricans will identify with the Democrats and so forth. But there has been an incredible push by one party, particularly in the South, East and the Southwest, against vaccination and against masking. And so some of the things that you will hear from the Hispanic community has been through regular TV channels in their areas. It hasn't been the social media misinformation, but through some of the in 2010 reliable information like Univision, and now they have had all kinds of advertisements that were very much against masking, very much against. So those were bought advertisements in Spanish for the Hispanic community, and that had some effect, I think. There were some commonalities that I saw. So with the Southern Kentuckians, because I did hear the Lord and my faith will protect me. That was very common in people that did not want to get vaccinated. They would wear their masks, but they wouldn't get vaccinated. There's a very strong mistrust of government, and it is not, people assume that it's undocumented, et cetera. No, it's more than that. It is what Commissioner Alan Bryant was describing in the experiments that Americans have done in Latin America. And one of those experiments was in the country I come from, is Guatemala. And there they did a lot of STD experiments. They had to have a population that had never had any STD, and so they infected army barracks. They infected prisoners. They wanted to go and infect an orphanage. In fact, the doctors there didn't know what the experiments were. The local doctors didn't know what the experiments were about, but they refused to allow them to give the children, the orphans, anything. So fortunately they were spared, but they're to this day, because of the genetic problems that leaves, there are still lawsuits in the United States against that. And so there is a historical bias against medical and government information. So there is that historical trauma that is very widespread. The vaccine, I've also heard, is just way too new, way too rushed. Companies are making a profit. And that's one thing that they heard on the news, and they heard in ads from whoever was buying those those ads. So one thing that our communities from abroad have very much in common is that they're very, very social. Their family is extensive. Friends are family. And so when you have a wedding, it still happened. When you have a birthday, it still happened. When you had a quinceañera, the 15th birthday celebration, that still happened, and hundreds of people would get together. So that is still a problem. People are very, very social, and they will not give that up. With all I've said, I remind myself and everyone else that every person is different. Every person has a different higher or lower educational, economic, or metropolitan or rural upbringing. So it all affects whether they decide to get vaccinated or not. With the Hispanic community, my conversations with workers in why they did decide to get the vaccine, and it was usually the boss, their employer, that required it for their employment. So that's it for me, unless you have any questions.
Thank you very much. That was a very panoramic view, and I really appreciate that. So what I think we should do now is open the floor for questions. I have about 10, but I will hold off. If you would like to ask a question, you can raise your hand using the reaction. Under reactions, there's a raise hand button. Or you could put the question in the chat if you so desire, and I can read it aloud. And when you're asking a question, if you have a question for a specific person, let us know. If not, we'll just open it to the whole panel. And you can, if you're on the panel and you want to answer, go ahead and raise your hand too, and I'll call on you in whatever order. Don't be shy. I mean, I have a million questions, so before I jump in, I'll give everybody a minute. Let's see nobody's hands are up. Okay, so I'll go ahead and start then. And my first question is this: it seems to me. Oh wait, there's somebody with a hand raised. Wait, hold, but I can't. Can I not see them? Hold on. I saw that it said there was somebody with a hand raised.
Lynn Phillips.
Oh, Lynn. Okay, go ahead, Lynn. I don't know why I can't see your hand, but okay, great.
Hi, thanks, Karen. That was amazing. I learned a whole lot. Can we infer that the principles associated with rural urban, with red counties, blue counties, apply equally to the students at the University of Kentucky who refuse to get vaccinated?
That's a really good question. Mark, do you know anything about the numbers inside the university?
No.
No. Yeah. Yeah. Lynn, could you tell us a little bit more about your experience with do you have a sense of the students who aren't getting vaccinated? Part of it is it's been very kind of hush hush, who's vaccinated, who's not vaccinated. There hasn't been an opportunity to really lay that out.
Yeah, it's, I mean, this is super anecdotal, but it seems that Tiffany's words with respect to, the Lord will save me, kind of the religious sort of, the vaccine is the mark of the devil, seems so super extreme to me, especially among educated people who are in college. But I've heard that from several students.
Does anyone from the panel want to jump in here and maybe Tiffany, do you have a sense about what the university students that are coming from Eastern Kentucky are experiencing?
Well, I have a staff member who has worked with me who has remained unvaccinated, and she is heading off to college this fall, and she's been accepted to a college that's just like UK requires vaccinations or the testing requirements, and her family has took a stance against the vaccine. For numerous reasons. I personally believe there's a lot of religious stances on that. And she recently informed us that she has now made the decision to have the vaccine because of the college requirements. She didn't want to do the testing. So I can tell you that across the board, whether it be low education level versus extremely high level educated individuals who I would never expect to have those words come out of their mouth related to I'm just gonna trust in the Lord. You know, it's kind of shocked me. Not that I don't have 100% trust in God and knowing He can absolutely take care of that, but I do believe in God, and I do believe in science, and I do believe that He is giving the ability to be rescued from this pandemic because of the precautions that we have taken, whether it be the mask, whether it be the vaccination, the social distancing, all those steps. I believe He's given those and inspired those. But you would be very surprised across the board, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of educational achievements, that those opinions have stood firm for some folks. And until, I kidded, we've worked in a lot of different churches, so I'm familiar with a lot of churches in their communities. But, I kind of, I don't want to say jokingly because it's nothing to joke about, but I told my husband, I said, that church isn't going to change their stance until it hits home. And unfortunately, I watched that time and time again till these churches that continue to have their in-person services where they just openly and blatantly did not want to wear masks, and they thought everything was just part of a hoax and part of the government's way of controlling things, until they had major outbreaks and until people died. Then folks started going back, and I don't want to use the term eating their words, but they had to start backtracking and say, look, this may be something here. But it was a very sad situation that we watched that time and time and time again.
Thank you so much. Would anybody else on the panel like to jump in on that? If not, or did anybody want to ask a question? All right, I'll throw in my one question here. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Tiffany. I'll throw in a question about. I'm sort of in a ways I'm hearing that there's similarities across. Sort of, what Isabel was saying and Casey was saying about distrust of the government, or the sort of religious. I mean, it seems like the. It'd be interesting from a. We don't have any statistics on this, but. It sounds like the reasons are similar across broad and very different swaths of population. I'm just going to throw out there and see what you think. Casey, I see you nodding. Would you want to go ahead and jump in here?
Oh yeah, I absolutely. I mean, I focused today's talk on the African American community, but I will say by and large that I've always said we're more alike than we are different. And even with our vaccine hesitancy, even with it across geographic areas, across cultural, racial groups, a lot of the reasons are exactly the same. It may vary slightly, as in, like the Tuskegee Experiment was mostly focused on African American men, but just like Isabel was saying, there were some experiments done on the Latinx Hispanic community as well. So yeah, I would definitely say that is a very, very true statement. Even what Tiffany was saying, you'll hear some, not as much, but you'll hear some religious reasons as well among African Americans. So yeah, I think that a lot of what we're saying is the same.
But I mean, I think that I find that to be a really interesting sort of development, in the sense that, then these sort of broader causes are having to do with sort of with sort of social factors and, sort of broad social factors. And that's where, sort of to focus the attention. I think that's really interesting. Okay, here's a question from Ariel Arthur. Curious to hear opinions about how the local, state, and federal responses could have been better. I think much of the hesitancy and resistance we're discussing could have and should have been predicted. All right, I'll open that up to our panelists. Raise your hand if you want to go, or just kind of unmute and run with it.
Well, I was going to say, at least with, again, I'm going to go back to the population I'm most familiar with, the African American community. There have been studies about vaccine hesitancy, not just COVID-19 vaccine. Now, I'm not as familiar as with other populations, so Isabel and Tiffany may say, yeah, there's also other studies about that, but even just nationwide, I mean, we've had vaccine hesitancy related to our common childhood vaccines like MMR. And we've always kind of had those issues. And, even preparing the research study that I quoted earlier, that was in anticipation of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. So there was some preparatory work done, knowing that there's always been vaccine hesitancy among certain groups. It just seemed to, because I say, and Mark will probably agree with me on this, because the COVID-19 vaccine was just so political, now we're hearing that vaccine hesitancy coinage more, but it's always been there for other vaccines, particularly about childhood vaccines. And so in terms of preparation, we knew that it was going to be an issue. And so we try to develop trust from the get-go with certain vulnerable populations that have always had those disparities, those inequities. And so we try to prep for that as much as possible. Now, who could say that we were going to have a pandemic of this magnitude? I was chair of the Board of Health when this pandemic hit, and you talk about being thrown off, like, wow, we thought we were prepared for any kind of pandemic. This was one aspect of it that you could not have predicted. Now, did we have some things in place? Relationships with communities, people from those communities that we know that the hesitancy is more pronounced in. We had those relationships already. We strengthened those relationships to try to get through some of these barriers. Are there things that we could have done better? Absolutely. Could we have predicted a pandemic of this magnitude? Absolutely not.
Yeah. I do want to say that I work with the Department of Emergency Management, and I've been working with them and training with them since I arrived in Lexington. And there has been a pandemic plan that FEMA had in place. We actually practiced it when we thought we might get the Ebola years ago. And there was a commission that prepared a pandemic, a national commission, but it was the wrong party, and they had left very specific steps to take very quickly, but it wasn't used. And so I think that FEMA as a whole really was prepared, but the people weren't in place, if that makes any sense. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of research done on that aspect, because we have a lot of training and a lot of ways of doing things differently, and activating our communities to help themselves in times of crises. And that's how it would have played out, perhaps. Again, it's the political parties in the play that make things sometimes a little difficult.
Mm-hmm. Mark, I know that you were wanting to get in here, and certainly the political parties are your specialty here.
I mean, I was just thinking that you can see it as two types of problems. One is a resource problem. I mean, healthcare is distributed, very unequally across communities in the United States, probably more so than, most, at least democracies, advanced industrial democracies. So one reason why people don't trust, doctors or healthcare specialists might be they don't have as much opportunity to go see them and interact with them. And then the other part of it is motivation and trust. And, I can show you just tons of studies. You're right, it was before, COVID hit the scene about vaccine hesitancy and the anti-vax movement among yuppies in California. And, the researchers designed very specific, smart, thorough experiments and ads to show people. And, I won't say it didn't have any effect, but it was really discouraging, because once you think about trust, it's easy to be distrustful and it's hard to regain a sense of trust, right? So you're really talking to a brick wall almost. And, unless people are, so there are no easy answers. Yes, we can do a lot of finger pointing, but at least in the last few years, things have been rolled out, just as Tiffany said. It's not due to a lack of facilities. It's, the fact that people don't trust the government, or they trust a higher power, or, it's just, I don't see any silver bullet that is going to change things around. We know it's going to happen again sooner rather than later. And we're all going to be asking the same questions. And people will be, making, not bad choices because they're given bad information by, bad, people who are making money or gaining some kind of political advantage from misinformation or conspiracy theories or what have you.
Yeah.
Tell you one thing that I just want to throw out there, talking about what could the local folks have done differently. We have a doctor in our community who is very well known, very well respected. He is a medical director at a local clinic, but he also does call and is very well known within the hospital, the Appalachian Regional Healthcare group as well. And one of the key things that he did is he would do, just like Governor Beshears did, his daily update there for a long time. This physician would take to social media, and he would do, there in the thick of things, he done a daily update himself. And what he did is he used his influence to debunk all the news media, all the hype of this and that and the other. And, that seemed to have more weight on folks than whatever they're going to get from, some
public service announcement.
And I mean, it's just, Dr. Schoenberg, that's one of the platforms with the whole Faith Moves Mountains research that she does is, when they looked at how that they could change health disparities in Eastern Kentucky, we don't take well to outsiders. That's just the Eastern Kentucky thing. It takes a lot of, we got to know you well before we really trust you. And, with her research, that's what, they work with community health workers to go out in these churches and organizations to share health information. So it's the lady you sit with in your, your devotion studies or your church service during the week. They're the ones providing that information to you because you trust them, you know them. And, so that's what his clinic started doing, is they took their folks that were there that people trusted and that people said, well, if he said it, then it's good enough for me. And that was their big platform. And that was very, very successful. And I think that principle would probably work in Casey's environment as well, because I see her shaking her head. It's people trust local folks, and just, the millions of dollars that was spent on these commercials and these billboards, did it really matter? I think it's more of that local opinion, those who and what experience did they have.
Yeah.
Can I add to that?
Yes,
Dr.
yes, go ahead.
Dr. Osage put something very important in the chat, and just about how the messaging is. And she's exactly right, because, you have to present things in a way that is not scary, that people are going to understand, and tailor messages to your population. And so I think that at a national level, we probably could have done a better job for that, and particularly about these vaccines, so that people knew that, it wasn't something that to be fearful of. Now, it didn't help that we were also fighting against the messaging out there that was just made up out of thin air, that was completely incorrect, and it was total falsehoods. But I think there is something, as Tiffany was saying, to using your local folks, which is a lot of what we were trying to feed off of relationships we already had with people, and try to make it not sound so scary. One of the first things I would say is to people is, I'm not getting that COVID vaccine. I said, do you get a flu shot every year? And they're like, yeah. I said, and then those who were older, I said, now how many of you got the smallpox? But you don't want to get this COVID vaccine, but you got the smallpox vaccine when it came out, or the polio vaccine. Here I'm talking about our older generation. So, putting it into terms that people know, and so it just doesn't sound like something that's so out of this world when it really isn't.
Thank you. Yeah, Julie Osage said that the messaging for the vaccines was poor. mRNA meds are not new, and they were made to sound brand new and futuristic, which scared people, right? Indeed. And then similarly, a messaging problem, Thomas Hackinson writes, don't forget that we were all initially told that masks don't work, and then the CDC completely reversed course, and that didn't help, right? And Nancy has a question.
Well, this is maybe more of a comment. First of all, thank you all so much for some great insights. I appreciate it so much. And just, Thomas, I think you're just right. These sort of back and forth recommendations have been very confusing to many people. The other issue that I would bring up is that it's really important to remember the folks in Eastern Kentucky, where the amazing Tiffany Scott is, they have always had a really high rate of vaccination. So, this question of, not trusting outsiders is definitely a phenomenon, as Tiff has said. But after enough reinforcement and just the influence of friends and neighbors and trusted healthcare professionals, people are ready to roll up their sleeves. So I'm very, very concerned about the perception that people from Eastern Kentucky are snubbing their nose at science, or in any way not taking into consideration the right thing to do. As Tiffany says, there are a lot of circumstances that give rise to this, and we have to be sensitive to those circumstances, but it's just not out of a willfulness, and it's not out of not accessing healthcare, but oftentimes it just has to be the right social environment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Tiffany added here that if she remembered correctly, the doctor from who was trying to influence received the vaccine on Facebook Live, right? And again, that's the environment that Nancy's talking about. Nancy and Tiffany. Thank you. Other questions from the audience? If not, I always have a question. I have a question for sure. Okay, so the question that I have is, I think the answers to this question have been sort of laid out in in some of the oh, okay, I'll read Julie's comment rather than my question. Seeing science work in real time also confused people, changing protocols and directions as we learn more. To some of us, it was fascinating, but to non-science folks, it was confusing. Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point. What I was going to ask is, what can we do better, right? I mean, this is it. I think I'm hearing some of the, hearing Tiffany's recommendations, get those trusted local insiders to be doing the work. But, Mark, is there anything we can do to sort of tamp down this polarization, right? The fundamental underlying political polarization that you're talking about. And Casey and Isabel, are there ways to reach out to, or what are the best ways to reach out to communities as diverse as the sort of populations in Lexington, the international populations and other sort of populations in Lexington? What is the best way to do this? And is it always that trusted insider? And if so, how do we cultivate that network of, how have you been cultivating that network of trusted insiders?
What we did early on was to use our connections and our relationships with the leadership. The leadership was often doctors or professors or people. But if a pastor is recommending you not get the vaccine, it really, or an elder person is recommending that you not get the vaccine, it's not going to happen for certain small groups. And so we really have to build the trust and the relationship with the key people. And so it's not just going to be anybody in the community that we know. It has to be key people, like Tiffany was lucky enough to have in their community. We did find a doctor from Congo who had worked on the Ebola epidemic, and he did come and record a video and talk about it. We did get Hispanic doctors to come. Researchers, UK researchers came to discuss the biology of it all and the chem. So we tried the videos, we tried streaming on Facebook and on the radio, and but honestly, part of the problem for the populations that I work with is that it's very personal. Getting together and breaking bread is the way to build that communication and to come to agreement. And it was not possible during the pandemic. And so we had a lot of barriers to overcome, languages and cultures and things. So it was a huge learning curve, and I think we've learned a lot. So that's the happy news, is that we've been through a lot, we've learned a lot, and we're just going to have to keep working at it.
Mm-hmm. So there's another question in the chat, and I still would like to follow up with the others on those questions too. But I'll throw this one out there too, and you can answer what you'd like. From Bobby Scroggins: is there any training available for vaccinated people to effectively communicate with unvaccinated friends and relatives regarding the advantages of being vaccinated?
Good question.
Not that I know of, but that's a darn good idea. So, there's not been a specific training. I mean, what we've done, kind of as Isabel said, on the African American community here, and can I say that, Lexingtonians, I mean, our vaccination rates are great. We are in a wonderful position. And so I am hoping, when we do our research, that all of our efforts, it's because of all of our efforts. But the first thing we did as a health department is we partnered with our Black Church Coalition and our Black pastors. And we had a vaccination clinic at one of the popular African-American churches in Lexington, continuously vaccination clinics. And if the fact that it was held at the church was like, oh, that was putting a stamp on, this is a good thing, right? We can go. Pastor such and such is letting it have his church. And so nothing put more validity to that vaccine being needed and let's get it done than us making that movement. And so, but we didn't have a training necessarily to teach the lay people how to communicate with others. But I think that is a great idea. And somebody has posted something from NPR, looks like, and that's really good. But yes, I think that maybe I need to post that at the next board meeting.
All right, excellent. And then also Patty Singleton, so there are two, so Ariel Arthur has posted links to 2 articles, which hopefully you all will cut and paste it before you leave. And Patty Singleton has talked about the Human Development Institute, which has a training on motivational interviewing to start those hard conversations. So that's another resource. I want to get back to the political for a minute and let Mark, is there anything we can do about the underlying polarization?
I mean, there are the underlying polarization is, I think, as long as politicians get reelected, if they spread misinformation, or that politicians can, I mean, I keep thinking about the big lie about the election. Our whole democracy is kind of hanging by a thread in a sense. And, unless unless the incentive for spreading misinformation ends, then I don't see much promise of, I haven't seen studies for ending polarization in general. I have seen studies, though, that are really promising, field experiments that people do where they kind of randomly assign people to different treatments out in the real world. And one recent one paid people to watch CNN instead of Fox News for a month. And it was, it changed their political attitudes. There's another series of studies where interviewers, either in a televised ad, or they'll knock on doors and talk to people. And if they can establish a connection with them and tell a story that has a strong narrative about maybe people who are subject to discrimination or various kinds of phobias, they can change attitudes. So, most of the literature is filled with unsuccessful attempts to change strong attitudes that are kind of, firmly rooted. But, others are working on some really, I don't know. I don't even know if the researchers have figured out exactly what it is about the way they're communicating these stories, but there is enough evidence of an ability to change people's minds that, it gives me some degree of optimism. But usually I just, you see it so much and it's so discouraging. You just think, oh, it's got to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah. Well, I hope conversations like this can help us to, sort of find some ways. So would other panelists like to have a last word or two? There are 4 minutes. So if there's a last question, or if somebody would like to make a comment or some to sum up, or to something that you haven't quite touched upon yet.
one thing that I would be interested in maybe hearing from the other three panelists, or anyone for that matter, is if anyone experienced any discrimination or any issues from taking a strong stance on the vaccination. That was something that we had that we dealt with personally in our community in the beginning.
Wow.
Just our roles, my husband and myself's role, with healthcare and the roles we have. In the beginning, there was, from day one, we were with the governor, everything he was doing. We were very open with that. We have just from the nature of our community, we have a pretty good Facebook following, just for different things we do. And we were very, very vocal from day one about our opinions, and, we sharing only CDC information and trying to, showing the evidence that debunked a lot of these things. And it got very interesting, some comments that were made and some things that were said and shared and different things. So I just wondered if that was something that anyone else had saw in the public health world for any type of some backlash for standing very strong for the vaccine.
Well, I mean, think about Rand Paul's attacks on Anthony Fauci, just accusing him of creating the whole pandemic as a scientific experiment or something. I mean, it's kind of tragic, isn't it? That, you get attacked for trying to help people. There's no, so is that continued, or was that an early phase and then people just unfriended you? Or
it was an early on thing, but still, I guess we're never going to get back to that normal in all aspects of life. Even as folks start coming back to churches and different things, those church numbers are never going to, it's going to take a long time for attendance numbers to get built back up, and I think it's going to take a long time to repair some of those things, because this is one of those things that is ever changing. And unfortunately, like I said earlier, until it hit home for people, there was people literally until they had a loved one die that they still felt like that it was a conspiracy. But I do want to echo what Nancy said. Everyone here is not like that. My comments have all been related to the hesitancy, because that's our discussion today. So we all, there's lots of us who don't feel that way, but just from those people that we did see, those people who were against the vaccine were very against the vaccine. And we had a situation, I'll share this, and my degree's in communication, so I'm a talker. Nancy Schoenberg can vouch for that, so I can probably out talk anybody. But I had a very sad situation with my best friend. She was going through a divorce. She had 2 children. One was old enough to receive the vaccine in the first round of approved vaccinations for children. She is a nursing student. The father of the children that she was being separated from at the time did not believe in the vaccine. And so because he wouldn't sign for the child to get the vaccine, the mother couldn't as well. And so both of those kids did get COVID, and luckily they didn't have life-altering effects that we know of at this time. But that's just one example because of this custody situation. Those kids couldn't be vaccinated because of that. And it just bothered the mother to no end because she was vaccinated, but yet she couldn't protect her children. So there's so many different reasons folks haven't got vaccinated, and we've discussed a lot of those today. But just as I guess it was Casey said, this isn't the first vaccine. It's not going to be the last. And I think the main thing is that communication piece from day one, from the top to the bottom. We've got to have that message right, and we've got to have it right from day one. And I know this, we watched this unfold, and it was changing because it was new. But it does take us back to that initial messaging of what we heard. And sometimes folks hear the first thing and then they cut their TV off. So, I think messaging is a key thing, and out of the mouth of who it comes from as well.
Right. Thank you. That's seems to me that's the perfect way to end our session. Thank you so much to all of our wonderful panelists. This has been really illuminating, and I think really valuable too, to be thinking about, sort of what are the best practices and how we can, sort of improve that communication piece in the future, and try to sort of think through some of the issues and the ways in which we rebuild, establish and rebuild trust in communities. So thank you to everyone. This has been a wonderful opportunity, and I'm extremely grateful to all 4 of our panelists. And I'd like to give a hand to the panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was
Thank you.
great. Thanks for putting it on. I learned a lot tonight.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you so
Thank
very
you.
much. Really
Welcome.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.